Hello, this is Scott Jentz. Welcome to Sandbox Stories. Hello, welcome to this Sandbox Story, which is an interview with Dr. Bill Rafferty. He's been involved in an incredible variety of roles in the profession, from the VA to teaching at Duke to being involved in regulatory efforts. I am confident you're going to be glued to his many stories that he shares with us today. Dr. Rafferty, welcome to Sandbox Stories.
Thank you, Scott, for having me. I look
Wow.
forward to talking with you.
It's a pleasure. I thank our mutual friend, Dr. Ann Hoshite, for introducing us.
Yes, and is a special person, no
She
doubt.
is. I want to first share with the listeners something you told me about how you thought about the future of your profession as a doctor of optometry. It seems like you had a vision of what your daily life would be like, but then the world opened up to so many interesting opportunities that veered you away from that initial vision. Tell us a little bit about what you thought optometry would be like at the beginning of your career.
Well, I have to start back by saying I had an interest in medicine or healthcare in general, and my roommate in college decided to go to optometry school, so he mentioned it to me that he was going, and he actually was in the class ahead of me at UAB. But and that was a stimulus for me, looking into the profession and eventually going into it. But I envisioned going into optometry is, oh, good, I could have my own private practice. I could ride my bike to work every day and just enjoy life, and that would be pretty much my profession. So
Did you have an experience with optometry before you had this roommate influence you a little bit?
I lived in a small town in Florida, and there was an optometrist there, Dr. Fields, and I never saw him. I never had, those days you didn't get an appointment unless something was wrong, and I saw fine and never in school screenings, never was sent or anything. But I was aware of him. My grandfather was a surgeon and retired in Sebring, and so I got a lot of earful of information about healthcare from him. I would visit him frequently, and I can remember one day telling me about national healthcare. This is in the 50s, and he said, national healthcare is going to be the ruination of healthcare in America. I didn't know what he was talking about, and then later on, as it became a reality, I kind of could relate to what he felt at that time of his life in retirement, and so it was impactful. But no, I didn't envision where I ended up in optometry to be what I started out at all. So
Well, let's go back to the very beginning. You told me you were born in Indiana, but by 3 months of age, your family had settled in Sebring, Florida. I'd love to hear a little bit about your mom, your dad, what you learned from them. What was it like there?
my dad was he grew citrus. He had a citrus grove, and as I mentioned, we at one time talking to you informally, we worked. Everybody worked. My brother and myself, we did things to help pick the fruit and prevent freezes and everything else. But he had a strong. He had four brothers, and so the family was close because my grandfather was there and had my grandmother until she passed away. But one of my dad's brothers was a kind of a famous tuberculosis doctor and wrote a book on tuberculosis. So I was always being, kind of around some sort of talk about medicine in a sense. And My dad was very much part of, was kind of the I guess the person in the family that everybody gravitated to because of my grandparents. But and my mom was a school teacher, so she was very influential in terms of she was just an excellent person as well. And she lived to be 99 and a half and retired here in Winston-Salem where I live now. And I was able to kind of help her in the last years of her life. And it was everybody that met her said, "Boy, what a dynamic person that was." And I said, "Yeah, she didn't take a lot. She told you how she felt, and I think I learned a lot from that experience.
We did talk a little informally about citrus farming. I remember being at an AOA meeting in Florida at one time when it was really cold, and I learned about them freezing the outside of the fruit with water. They turn on the sprinklers. You were telling me other ways you protect it. How does
Yeah.
that work?
Before the Environmental Protection Agency was really going, the technique was to burn old rubber tires in the groves, and then later on, and that would help to keep the heat and circulate around the trees and things like that. Because if you lost your crop, you kind of lost your income for the year, so it was pretty important.
Wow.
And then they went to smudge pots, to burn and things like that. But yeah, the sprinklers, is another way later. But that was before my grove experiences, so to speak. So
Just a little bit more about your grandfather. He was a surgeon of what?
he was interesting. He was practicing uh, general surgeon. Had his own hospital at age 20. Uh, and he fast tracked all the way up and went through medical school at Jefferson Medical School in Chicago, and then practiced for his whole career in Robinson, Illinois, where he is buried, and my parents are both buried. So
Hmm.
so he was well known in the community. But it's funny how time goes by. When you go there now, nobody really knows, other than seeing you go out into the graves and see the gravestones and everything. And there's about three generations of our family there. But
Oh,
and it's an experience that when you go back, and it's a small town that's known for Heath candy bars. That's where they make Heath candy bars, and they also make the oil industry is very big there. So yeah.
and then you also had mentioned to me that there might be a story about some influence one of your older brothers had given to you.
Well, not one. I only have one,
Okay.
and
All right.
he just was here visiting, and we have such a good time when he visits. He was the intellectual. I called him the intellect. I was he was the one who would read books and who was building ham radio units and everything growing up, and he listened to classical music. I was out playing in sports, and I listened to the Beatles and, and Rolling Stones and things at that time, and we had this, it was he was opposite polar, but now we're the closest can be. And I share his interest and he shares mine. So, it's very, very nice to have that. But he was an influence because he was salutatorian of his class. And, I was okay student, but he always somebody I looked up to. And I said, I gotta get going here to catch up with the sibling competitions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was a little late on that scene, but it was fun. We're still close like I said, he just visited. So
I want to touch on your service career. I'm grateful for those of you that served. And you were enlisted with the Florida Army National Guard and the Alabama Army National Guard, and a commissioned officer in the North Carolina National Guard. It all started around 1970. What was going on in that time that got you to go into the service?
well, I just have to be honest about it. When I was in school in the University of South Florida, and I had a work study program with the Food and Drug Administration at the time, and I would go to Washington, and it's a 5-year program, and um, but I got a notice I was A1 classified, being drafted in the service, and I had looked at a reserve unit 2 years before, when it was during Vietnam, and there were no openings in any reserve unit. And somehow, about a month before I was going into the service, um, the National Guard unit called me and said, "Hey, are you still interested in the reserves?" And so I said yes, and so I went down that day and signed up, and been was 23 years, or a little more than that, in the reserves. So
Wow.
I went through basic training then as an enlisted through Fort Jackson, and as an enlisted person, and so I got to see both sides, and then later on, after optometry school, I got a direct commission. So it was, as an optometrist. So I saw the enlisted side and then the officer side.
Got it.
Yeah, he was.
So you talked about going to the University of South Florida, and you ended up at UAB, where you graduated in 1977. You talked about this roommate influencing you to go there. What was training like and graduating in 77? What was our profession like then?
Wow, that's a great question because Henry Peters, historically, it may be known to some optometrists, but he was the dean at the time, and he was. I would say the program was integrated with medicine and dental school, and so our core curriculum, we took all the classes with medicine and dentistry and physiology, histology, anatomy, neuroanatomy, and we took that in the medical school. So it was a, I don't know how exactly they do it now. They may still do it in a similar way, but the uh, the first 2 years were very much entrenched in medical in orientation, and then the last 2 years more, in optometry and clinical, that kind of thing. So um, yeah, it was a great education. At that time, we weren't really taught a lot about therapeutics because we weren't able to practice them. And my story about that is that it's kind of an interesting. Dan Robinson, who is Jack Robinson's son, and Jack Robinson is fairly well known historically in optometry. He was the executive director of the state board, optometry state board in North Carolina before me. He and one of my mentors, I have to say, but Dan encouraged me to come to North Carolina because they just passed a therapeutics bill, one of the in '77, and I said, well, I could go back to Florida where I could live very limited practice, or I could go to North Carolina. And he told me, he says, yeah, come see my dad this past the application deadline, but I'm sure dad will let you take the exam and come on in. And so at Dan's suggestion, I flew to North Carolina and met his dad. And his dad looked at me, he says, what can I do for you? And I said, Dan kind of set up this situation where I would talk to you. And he said, I don't know anything about it. What do you want? And I think he was playing with me a little bit, and you'd have to know him to understand that. But he said, you want to come take the exam?" So I said, "And you're late in the application." And I said, "Well, I understand if I'm late. I'm whatever." So I flew back to Birmingham, and then all of a sudden I got a notice that that I'd been accepted for the application, and then later on in many years working with Dr. Robinson, he would say things to me like, I only made one mistake in my life, and that was letting you take the exam. So
That's funny.
he always had the last word. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
right. We talked a little bit about mentors. You had mentioned Dr. John Potter, who incidentally has been a guest of mine on Sandbox Stories. What did Dr. Potter do that gave you some guidance?
John was first of all, John was at UAB in the VA, and when I had a rotation in the VA, so I met him in '73, '4, '5, probably '74, '5, something like that. And John was unique, everyone knows. His approach to healthcare was very insightful, and he was somebody that just stuck in your mind. And then later on, I worked for a refractive laser surgery center, and John was involved in that. And there was some controversy about some ethics dealing with the surgery center, and I took a stand, kind of to say, I don't think that's appropriate, and this is dealing with a pretty large corporation, and they didn't like that stand. And John came and said, Bill, you're doing the right thing. And he was probably the only one. I remember that to this day. He said, I understand where you're coming from. And he was in the management side of the corporation. So, it stuck with me that, John's has strong ethical beliefs and principles. And I don't know, I haven't talked to him in so long, but I hope to reconnect with him sometime in the near future.
Well, I'll shamelessly plug my Dr. John Potter Sandbox Story, in which he talks about a career now that he lives fully as a full professor at Southern Methodist University, not doing optometry, but doing conflict management resolution training. And it's a fabulous story. And it's no surprise his ethics have carried him pretty much through everything he's done in the profession. And I think he's influenced you and me and many others in a way that's driven that into optometry as well. So a great fellow. And what about Dr. Bob Newcomb?
Well, let me say one thing about ethics first before you go on. It's been when somebody has an impact, you always think, should I do what's easiest or should I take the hard road and take a stand? And I've always followed what I thought was the right thing to do, and it's not always been popular. Whether it was especially in regulation, but it's one thing that I lived my career by, and I don't regret to this day, not one time. So, and as far as Bob was a mentor in the VA when I was he and John were together in the VA in Birmingham. And I met them both at the same time. And Bob, I was in Salisbury in North Carolina, and it was early on when therapeutics had just been approved in North Carolina in 77, and I was in the VA in 78. And I was kind of a tennis ball, so to speak. North Carolina had granted, they use your state license. I was given quite extensive privileges, but surgery in Washington wasn't really happy with the extent of privileges I had at that time. And they kind of used North Carolina and, and me as John would say I had the brown hat derby. Bob would always say you have the brown hat derby award, but it wasn't me. It was more just the person in that position at the time. They wanted to, it was a controversial time, and I understand both sides. But it was hard in that role. But Bob was a great mentor. I'd call Bob, "Hey Bob, what do I do with this?" And he would help. He had a lot of wisdom from experience in the VA over the years. He was great. He was super.
But all the care that you guys started providing in those days has transferred forward. I mean, optometry just got another opportunity to express its place in the VA system, and that's really important work you were doing. Sometimes controversial, but
Mhm.
the power of optometry in the VA is substantial today.
Without a doubt. I mean, when we started, there were 17 of us that came in 78, and I think he joined about 7 or 8 or 9 or maybe 10 people. So it was a very small group, and we were always testing the waters of what we should and shouldn't do, and we'd probably go to the limit of what we could do, and with confidence. And I was lucky in a sense that I had a great working relationship because Salisbury was far removed from Durham, but Durham was the place we did that did surgery in the VA. So I would send patients for cataract surgery, and they would send them back, and I would co-manage with them early on, and before co-management kind of started. And not only that, but there was a lot of we would back and forth on therapeutic treatment of patients that were had a lot of things that came up at the time, and we'd collegially work together. And that was my first experience working with ophthalmology, is as just a sole provider in the VA. And then so that was pretty an exciting time, when you were first out and you were practicing full scope optometry, and you were learning as you went sometimes, I have to admit. And John Potter will even tell you that's how it went.
Yeah.
That's how we did.
Yeah. And to put a button on the mentor story, you had mentioned a couple of people at Duke that had been substantial in your career trajectory.
Yeah, David Epstein, the chair of Duke, was an exceptionally honorable person. He never looked at optometry or looked at He looked at it in terms of eye care, and we all had a role. And he was a giant person in ophthalmology, and chaired Duke. And he passed away when I was still in the department. And it was sad for me because he was. He'd tell me stories about, the politics of it going behind the scenes, and it was refreshing. And I always was honest with him, and he was straightforward and honest with me. But he was very impactful in terms of understanding how optometry and ophthalmology could work together. There was another now the chair in ophthalmology at Michigan, Paul Lee, MD, JD, and he and I did a lot of research to get. It was his grants, and I participated as an investigator in his grants. But he was unbelievably talented, and well, obviously he's now chair at Michigan, so I haven't had a chance to talk to him in a long time, but he was impactful. And Alan Carlson, a surgeon there, and refractive surgery and cornea. I was in the corneal department, so Alan was exceptionally kind and generous with his time and education and teaching and whatever it took, and and it inspired me to be a teacher, and so we had externships and we were working on a residency there, but I have a lot of the externs that went through the Duke rotation and still are very close friends now. And they have stayed and have become, people involved in optometry in a significant way. So that's rewarding when your students, take off and do something. So
Yeah, well, it's really interesting for somebody who had thought of perhaps medicine as a path. You get influenced into optometry. You spent time in departments of ophthalmology at both Wake Forest and Duke. And you mentioned more mentors from ophthalmology than most of my optometry guests do. And it's a sign to me that you really found your place, particularly you talk about education. Who knows how much of your mom you were expressing there, right? But
yeah.
you were building bridges for the profession that many have to build on their own, sort of externally. Those must have been amazing times. How did you end up getting in these medical systems as opposed to, say, a college of optometry?
Well, it was far from riding a bike to my private practice as I started out. I don't know. I think Dr. Robinson played a role. He asked me if I'd be interested in being a clinical examiner for North Carolina board, and then from there he kind of asked me if I'd be involved with being a board member, and so I think that propelled me into being on the ARBO board of directors and the national board and all those kind of things. But I mean, it's people that mentor you and take you under their arm, and I've that made some, it gave me a lot, and so I've tried to give back in the same way, and I do every time I have a chance, and it's a little hard when you're the executive and looking at public protection as a regulatory board, but I really do work with optometry and advocacy. I try to in our state, and trying to find ways to educate people not to get in trouble, let alone have to deal with them when they get in trouble. So
Right, analysis of prevention. Yeah.
yeah.
So you did end up in regulatory affairs in substantial ways, and this idea of protecting the public is at the core of it. And as executive director of the North Carolina State Board of Optometry, you've got a substantial role today. How did you start the interest in regulatory affairs? I mean, we talk about how you jumped over there, but was that a natural interest? Was that how did it start?
Well, you know, in North Carolina, it was interesting because we were dealing in in those early years and not after getting therapeutic privileges of keeping them.
Yeah,
And and there were many interested in reversing those decisions, and so I think we tried to do the right thing and we tried to help. We recognized that what we did was exceptionally valuable, and it's interesting. I always said that ophthalmology on a one-to-one basis, they love optometry because we synergistically work together. We do things that they don't want to sometimes, and they do things that as an optometrist we don't necessarily want to. I've sometimes heard you should have been an ophthalmologist. Well, I never wanted to do surgery, so I mean, so I tell even though I do minor procedures, I don't consider this that major surgery, but I mean, I think have our own niche, and I think people that are optometrists want to be optometrists, and I've often felt that. I think others would share that belief, but I would say that when you when you just go out to do your best in terms of of working with people, and you build relationships, and I don't care who it is, and eye care. You're going to build them with optometry or ophthalmology, and I was in a unique position to build them with ophthalmology because I was in a couple different departments, many of which have still stay my friends. So there are a few that don't want to endorse optometry, in the fashion but that's always going to be the case, I think so.
Well, one of the things that I think we could say, and it might sound denigrating to the next generation of optometrists, is that there's very few that are interested anymore in as much volunteering, the work that it took to get the prescriptive rights that we have, to get the advanced care privileges that we have. And so you talked about getting into regulatory to, in fact, protect those things that you had fought for before. Is there a message you have for those in the audience that are saying, those are the old days. It won't be taken away from us today. I have to think that there's always, an important angle in showing that what we do for the public is safe for them, is effective for them. Is there a message you could give to my audience to reinforce it?
I've always said that optometry having an advocacy side and a regulatory side is exceptionally important to optometry's growth, and understanding that dynamic is I think is critical. Often, regulatory boards are looked at by, they're in myself, in a sense. If I get stopped by a policeman for going 78 in a 60-mile-an-hour zone or something, I go, oh, I've been same thing. I mean, it's basically, if somebody has an issue, you kind of want to, object to the regulation, but in a big term, it has helped our profession grow greatly. And behind the scenes, I see it all the time. I've often thought that by this time we would be totally, well, not totally by any means, but we would be integrated in a greater way with medicine, with ophthalmology. And there were opportunities that occurred and that didn't materialize, and that's unfortunate. But I hate the fact that you have to fight legislatively to do things, and I just wish there was a way to. And I still work at it with some of my colleagues to find ways to build that collegial relationship, to expand practices, and when it's going to be in the public's benefit. The rural optometrist out in the and where there is no ophthalmologist, those kind of situations, and so I think there's growth, and I'd like to see that happen sooner than later in my lifetime anyway, because I've always, we used to talk about it in optometry. Oh, there'll be a relationship with our colleagues at some point. Now, 40 some years later, we're still fighting, and I hate that part of it.
Yeah.
So,
I
and
want to
some
dig
of
into
my
that.
ophthalmology colleagues hate it as well. So,
I think that's right. I want to put that on the burner for a second over here and come back to it. I want to understand from the regulatory side, executive director of this North Carolina State Board of Optometry, what does a day or a week of your life, your work life look like? What are you doing? Are you in meetings? Are you interacting with legislators? What does it look like?
well, I'm a legislative liaison in North Carolina legislature, so I can go over and meet with legislators on issues that come up. That's not the primary role. The primary role of any state regulatory board is like I said, is public protection or assurance of competency of the licensees. And I've often felt like, we get out of school and we take national boards and everything, and we get just rigorous entry level criteria, and then all we have the rest of our career is continuing education. Now, unfortunately, I've witnessed a lot of practitioners in the years gone by just kind of didn't have a propensity to go into medical aspect of optometry, and so they got kind of left behind. And some of those individuals kind of end up with complaints in their later years, and I see those actually, and it's sad. And I often thought, in ophthalmology, they take a relicensure, a recredentialing. I'm sorry, with the with their not the regulatory board, but with their fellowship, their um, ophthalmology. Well, I can't even think of the
The
name.
specialty board. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, their specialty board, and uh, I've often thought, a nice general lighthearted educational exam, like to take and show your weaknesses, not to remove your license, just to say, hey, you're a little weak in this area. And so years ago we developed a project like that, but something like that is threatening, and so people didn't want to really endorse it. And medicine did the same thing. By the way, I worked a little bit alongside of the Federation of Association of Medical Boards, and that was a project they had underway as well for those that weren't board certified. That was what I was trying to think, board certified programs. So anyway, that's you can see my goal is for our profession to work. Eye care is eye care, and we could work together in a better way than we are now.
Yeah, you actually told me that that's optometry's big opportunity to become more integrated with ophthalmology, not under them, but working with them the way you've done it in your career. And yet, you also mentioned that while one on one we see those relationships really strong, the political side isn't always that way. There's the Department of Ophthalmology in my town where when my partners and I were really advocating for optometry and the right chairs were in place, good things resulted. It's been less and less that doctors are willing to maintain those connections.
Mhm.
Chairs change. Now it's 1 day co-management post cataracts. No, we're not going to do it. It becomes negative. It becomes political. Is there a way? Is there a light you show us at the end of the tunnel where these connections can be strong the way you've seen them inside of some of these institutions where you've taught?
Well, I can tell you that Bowman Gray now, I think, probably has 10 optometrists involved. When I was there were one or two. And Duke, now that I've retired in 2020, they have 10 or 12 optometrists that are working, and they're looking for more. So I don't. I always joked. I said it took 10 or 12 to replace me. No, it's just. But truly, they have 10 or 12 excellent doctors that are working in that want to work in those environments, and they want to be around that kind of thing. They want to learn and have extern and intern programs in those environments. And so, I think that um, Paul Lee used to say, the MD, JD that I worked with in research when he was at Duke before he left, he would say, with the baby boomers coming, all of us are going to need to work together in a way that we can benefit each profession, and we can have relationships that far surpass the idea of individual practices and competition. And he had a vision of that, and he shared that with me, and I strongly advocated for that and have advocated for that. Now, like you said very strongly, I don't ever think that we should merge and give up our profession, but that was never my goal, was to say, oh, we need to become one. No, I think optometry is unique. I think we provide unique services and certainly unique perspective on eye care that I don't want to lose. But the younger group that you mentioned a minute ago, we've got to find a way to get them tuned in to the history and to what our profession is, a young profession, and a lot of people go into it with the idea it's just a good profession to make a living at, and not they don't get they don't get energized by whatever energized you and I a long time ago to really take and try to grow the profession and try to develop it. And I don't know what it is, but I think there could be more programs maybe integrated into ASCO, and generally that could help, into some of the ASCO schools. And we have two new schools coming in North Carolina, and it's amazing. And I want those schools to be progressive. And I was involved in the feasibility study for High Point, and then uh, and also a little bit indirectly involved in Pembroke. But those schools are going to be what I hope to be what you could consider the future of optometry schools. And not entrenched in some of the I guess the programs that probably aren't of as much interest in today's market, I would say. So,
And a big takeaway for me from you is that because we are a highly ethical, well spoken profession, what it takes is sitting down with the ophthalmologists in various practices and academic programs and demonstrating that competence and that ethical basis through conversation. And you said you never backed away from a conversation because you're a very ethical person. You found these people to be supportive one on one. And that would be what I would take. Yes, this is the storytelling of the past that I'm trying to do to make sure that we motivate. So as the rest of you listen, listen to Dr. Rafferty's points, I would take from it that we need to sit down and continue the conversations. We can't let that just happen by chance. So that's what I take. Now, I
I
want
would
to ask
like to
you,
see your programs introduced into the optometry schools to see, to see some of the people that you have interviewed and some of the students say, "Oh my gosh, I think they'd be blown away." So, um,
well, I'll tell you, Bill, if there was, this sounds, there's no way to say this without sounding egotistical. So I have to preface it by saying it's not. I have found good fortune that there are people that I knew and people that I never did before, like you, that have been introduced to me that have sat and told their stories for 30 or 60 or 90 minutes. And I've concluded the same. If this could be mandatory listening for optometry students, it would fundamentally change their basis on which they build their careers. There's just some incredible people that have come through this podcast, and I can consider you one of them.
well, that's very kind of you. I can remember you asked me about my military career, and I can't tell you how much I'm reflecting on that today because I was in a aviation unit, helicopter unit, and as you know, the accident this morning or last, I guess, early morning with American Airlines and a military Black Hawk helicopter. I was able to. I worked in a medical unit, but I worked with a ex-Vietnam helicopter pilot who we'd fly all over the state and do eye safety training and all of these kind of things. And he taught me to fly helicopter, an OH-58 helicopter, because he'd always say to me, "Hey, if something happens to me, I want you to get my ass on the ground." And so I'd say, "Well, I'll do my best." So, I was able to learn enough to probably get it on the ground, I would say. And, but
What's fascinating is that optometrists that think they're going to get, say, the small single doctor practice and bike to work. So many of you have done so many things you wouldn't have contemplated. That is the power of optometry and the people ahead of us having created the basis on advancing the profession of refractive and visual care, advancing diagnostic and therapeutic care and specialty care. Like, that's what makes this amazing for these students. And I see the ones in school today, they're eager. If they could get a history lesson along with their eagerness, I think the future's bright.
Yeah, I'd like to see it kind of change the direction from kind of going in directly into corporate practice, because some of them are lost in that they don't ever leave, or they don't ever break away. It's a good initial start for a lot of them who have debt, but some of them just don't. They get in it and that's just they stay in it, and it becomes more of an occupation rather than a passionate profession. So I 100% agree with you, Scott. I think that uh, there are ways that we could help, and I'd love to see that. So the reason I mentioned the helicopter thing was because with the crash this morning, it just uh, resonated, and I called who's now a close friend, my friend, and he said, "Yeah, I was really sad. We don't know the story yet, but." I don't want to end this on a sad note, but that happened today, and and it is it is something that brings about memories. So,
Yes. As we get close to the conclusion, I want to move away from work and I want to talk about Bill Rafferty, the human. What gives you joy in life?
you know, um, you started talking about what does an executive director do at the optometry, and I probably left that pretty quick. I don't get joy out of having to deal with disciplinary issues with optometrists at all. But I take those and I've developed webinars and I talk about how people got in trouble and how other licensees can avoid getting in trouble. So I look at it that way and not and never rejoiced in any disciplinary issue or anything that ever happened. That's part of the job. But what gives me joy in life is I have a wonderful wife, and I have a smaller family now, but I have a son and his beautiful wife and two grandchildren. And you reflect on that, and people say to you all the time, nobody's your profession's probably going to come by your graveside, but your family will. So, I think that I focus quite a bit on that now, and my family is very special. My son's a chef, and he's world class chef, and yeah, I had a birthday this week, and he prepared I went to his restaurant, and he had a dinner for all our family, and it was really nice. So, and at the end, he took his chef's outfit off and put his street clothes on and joined us for dinner. So it was good.
Well, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Let me have you take the last word. Deliver what bit of advice you'd like to give to a room full of people that are listening to your views about what optometry is about and where it's going.
Um, that's a good question, Scott. I've had a chance to lecture, but it was usually quite a bit of lecturing on medical stuff, not inspirational stuff. Ron Melton and Randall Thomas are friends of mine and very close friends, and I went to a lecture Saturday, and what I saw Ron do, he was pushing. Not Ron, but Randall. Randall was there. Ron wasn't there that day, but Randall was inspiring people to practice to their level of comfort. But behind the scenes in his lectures, he was inspiring people to increase their level of comfort. So he was saying, "This is how you do it, and you can do this." And he was trying to show people that had some reluctance about doing certain things, and it was always a good exchange. So I guess the message is to people is that set your own boundaries, practice ethically, don't take shortcuts because they usually don't help you in the long run. I see that quite frequently. Just do your best, and every day enjoy the fact that you can help people. And I still miss that part, that I'm not in clinic, but I mean, that's a great reward, and don't ever diminish that, and take pride in it. You're just not twisting dials. You develop doctor-patient relationships that are very valuable. And I guess that's what I'd have to say. People inspired me, and I hope that in some ways all the programs I've been involved in are better off. That was always my goal, is whatever program I was involved in is to make it a better program when I left it. And so I mean, that was my goal, and I hope other people can get passionate about the profession. So
Well, like a pearl, right? A little bit of discomfort creates growth. And you're right, encouraging others to challenge themselves, to know they can do something, but maybe they have to learn it like you did in the VA in those early days, gets them to where they want to be, to places they won't even today realize they're going to be.
without a doubt, I couldn't agree with you more, Scott. That's well said, and I hope that our profession will continue to grow in ways of being an integral part of healthcare, not just I can. My concern is there's a lot of refraction, so to speak, refractionists going on. That that will become with AI. Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you what I've envisioned AI to do to our profession. But I don't want to lose that doctor-patient relationship in the process. I hope we don't. And I've said this many times. Maybe we'll get better care, but it won't be as meaningful when you have somebody that cares about you as a patient. So anyway,
Yeah, because we're in the quality of life business.
yeah,
It's not just vision, it's not just retinopathy, right? It's quality
right.
of life.
We all get excited when we see something we haven't seen before.
Right.
But I always encourage people, if you get excited about something that's not necessarily in the patient's best, go outside of the door of their exam room and express some. When we learn something or we see something that we haven't seen before, it's exciting, and but at the same time, it's not exciting to the patient, and it's kind of an interesting dynamic, the way the roles we play, and you have to keep in mind. I remember somebody said he told me I had a cataract, and he wrote a complaint to the board because he said, I haven't been able to sleep for 2 months because he told me I had well, it was early, and I said, just be careful how you express yourself. So anyway, that's a silly story, but
Dr. Bill Rafferty, thank you so much for being our guiding light, for being the guest and sharing these stories on this episode of Sandbox Stories. Very grateful for what you've done and grateful to have built this friendship with you.
Scott, I look forward to meeting you in person. That's my next goal.
Me too. We'll find a way. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to the audience, thanks for attending and paying attention to Dr. Rafferty's stories. Until my next Sandbox story, be great at all you do.